Hi, I'm Curtis Cooke, the Executive Chef of Cal-a-Vie Health Spa, and you're in my kitchen today. The recipe we're going to focus on is king salmon, Romesco sauce, skillet corn, and zucchini, which can all be found in our cookbook, Beautiful Living. So for today's recipe, we've got a ton of colors as far as ingredients are concerned. Bell peppers, tomatoes. These are ancho chilies, dried and smoked poblanos. Some corn. I know I said skillet zucchini, but I actually found this gold bar squash. Just like zucchini, it's a summer squash, so whatever you find at your local market or store and it looks just as good as another ingredient and can sub, so I picked the yellow instead of the green. We've got some shallots and a little bit of garlic, and of course, our king salmon. Now, a quick note about salmon or fish in general. You want to be able to see what you're going to be taking home and putting in your body. So the first thing I do is I take it and I put it up to my nose. If it doesn't smell, or if it smells like the water it came from, then it's good to go. But fishy fish is fishy, so send it back. So let's get started with the sauce. You're gonna take the tomatoes and the red bell peppers and put them on a sheet tray, 350 degree oven, and roast them until they look like this. So your tomato skin kind of splits off, which we can remove. And then you've got this blistering on this red bell pepper, which once you cool it down, look how easy that is to remove. So we want to remove all of this skin. And what's the point of removing the skin? It's purely aesthetics and kind of a textural thing. All of this skin, when we put it in the food processor, is going to get broken up into little tiny strips, which you might need a toothpick after you eat, and that's not what I want our guests to have after dinner. So we remove the skin and we're left with this beautiful roasted bell pepper flesh. You can find these in cans too, but it's more fun to do it yourself. Now when you're doing it yourself, you've got this seed pod. You've got where it hung on the plant, and the seeds are right underneath it, but you can see that it naturally breaks open into 4 little pieces, which now I can just remove that entire pod with just a few remaining seeds left. Now back to the ancho chili, which is another part of our sauce. It comes in dried like this, so we need to get it softened. So we take it and we put it under some really warm water and let it sit 15 to 20 minutes, and it turns into a nice and pliable, and you can see the difference there in the color. Dried, rehydrated, it even lost all of its wrinkles. We made it younger again. So the same thing, it's hanging on the plant. So we'll start at the bottom and let's open that up. And as always, I have my trusty trash bowl because I do want to remove these seeds. They can be really bitter, and again, that food processor may not be able to break them up like we want them to. So let's just remove the majority of these seeds here. And then really the last component of this is kind of the unsung hero here, and it's all the juice collecting on the plate that we're working on. This is what I call love. You do not throw that away. That needs to be in this sauce. It is going to add even more flavor into that sauce. So roasted vegetables taken care of. We're also going to add a little bit of roasted garlic. We've got some toasted almonds and a little bit of toasted bread. This is going to help thicken or kind of bind the sauce. If you don't do gluten, use a piece of gluten-free bread, and you can just lightly toast it. If you don't want any grains at all, then don't use it. It's okay. Some smoked paprika to give it a little bit of smokiness. Sherry vinegar, always need acid. Acid helps things pop, just like salt. It pushes flavors forward. And then some olive oil. Okay, so now that we have all of our mise en place done for the sauce, let's start blending it in our food processor. So I'm gonna first start adding those ancho chilies, roasted red bells, roasted tomatoes, and roasted garlic. It's easier to work off the plates. You can stack them up, put them to the side, and they go right in the dishwasher. To that, we're gonna add our smoked paprika. So if you see what we're making here, it's a red pepper sauce. Think of the red peppers we've used so far. Roasted red bells, ancho chilies, and smoked paprika. So it's a definite red pepper sauce. We've got our sherry vinegar. We're gonna add our toasted almonds. Pour in our olive oil. And we're gonna start to blend it, because if we take all of the bread, we need to blend it first to see how loose it is. And I always cover the whole of the food processor, so if anything tries to escape and end up on this face, I can block it. So let's see where we stand. So the sauce itself, it's looking good. And the reason I've chosen the food processor is what you see right here. That's a bunch of texture. Not everything needs to be put into a blender and pureed smooth. So I like the texture of this sauce, but we can also see it's a little loose. So let's disrupt this thing a little bit, and we're gonna add just little bitty pieces of our toasted. You can use stale bread, so don't throw away that old bread. It can go straight into a sauce like this. And bread is super absorbent, so if the recipe says 2 cups cubed and toasted, it may only take a 1/4 cup. We just don't know, because our cubes are going to be different sizes. As you can see, I'm just breaking some in there, but it is going to be super absorbent, and a little goes a long way. So let's get that going again. See how it looks. So just the feel of it, it's already tightened up just a little bit, and I kind of like it just like that. It sits in the spoon, nothing spilling over, dripping. Well, I had one drip, but we didn't see that. But anyways, it's a nice sauce. So it's ready to go. Okay, so the sauce Romesco is made. Now let's start the prep work on the vegetables. So we've got to mince some shallots and garlic. We need to take care of this guy right here, an ear of corn, and let's just use a couple of these Gold Bar summer squash. So the first thing I want to do, and I use a plate to put all of my prep on, so as I process it, meaning breaking it down, dicing it all, I'm going to put it on a little portion of the plate, because then I can transport this to and from my stove, my workstation. So with the squash, the idea behind the squash is to almost mimic the size of a kernel of corn, but we're not going to go quite that small. We'll get close, but not quite. So we want to take off the ends of the squash, and then, as I always say, anything round needs a flat base, so we've got to start to get this thing flat. So I'm going to cut a plank. There's my first plank, and voila, it sits flat. So then I'm going to start my second plank, and the thickness of the plank is determined on how big or small I want to dice this Gold Bar squash. And if you do it just right, it stays together, and then you can flip it up, and then you can start cutting it into long strips or batons. And then you just turn it this way, keeping it stacked. And then what comes out are these beautiful little diced Gold Bar squash. Once again, keeping those fingers curled, eyes on the prize, which is your hand and your knife, making sure that they never touch each other. And then some more of these strips. Just go ahead and add this guy into it. And as you develop your knife skills, You will become more efficient and quicker with this, but go slow in the beginning. Don't worry about it. Cooking should be fun and not stressful. So what we're gonna do here is just make a little quadrant for our squash to hang out. Now next up, let's do the corn. Now I kept this whole because I wanted to show you how to shuck this. And I'll start by removing just the outer leaves, kind of getting me down into those more tender and pliable inner leaves. And once I get it down to probably the last level or two of leaves here, you've got all this silk. This silk runs all the way through, but almost threads throughout the entire corn. So what I like to do is take my, just hold it and pull. Now I've got this whole bunch strands of silk, and you just pull that right out. So it's removing the majority of them. Now on this one, you can still see there's a lot more silk there. So I start to kind of take my thumb. I want to get those all in one shot too. So I want to move my hand underneath and pull. And that removes most of our silk and a couple of different pulls on that. So the rest, I'm just going to kind of take out, just pick through the rest of them there. Now with corn, we have a decision to make. Do you feel comfortable holding it like this with your knife this far off the cutting board? A lot can happen between here and here. So what I like to do is I'll take it and I'll cut this down. This way it shortens that length in which I have to cut off the kernels. Now the one lesson I learned early on in my career, I attended the Culinary Institute of America, and you have to take a 5th term practical. You have to cook for a chef. And this is your exit exam. I saw corn in my basket of food. They don't tell you what they're gonna give you, they just give you a basket of stuff to cook. So I saw corn, and the first thing I thought, I saw a host of other vegetables. The first thing I thought was, I'll make a really nice hearty vegetable soup. So when I got to the corn, one thing they tell you in culinary school is do not waste. So let's get to this corn here. I started and I really cut as close to the cob as possible to get each kernel of corn off. But what you see on the kernel of corn is this piece right here. And remember when I talked about not having a toothpick after dinner? That's gonna get stuck in your teeth, and immediately when the chef ate one bite of my soup and chewed into some corn, he picked at his teeth. I was horrified. I passed with flying colors, but I will never make that mistake again. So instead of starting at the cob, loosen it up a little bit and just kind of come off, and you're still leaving not a ton of corn on that cob, but just a little bit. And I'll show you how to get that out in just a second. So we've got half of it done. Let's get the other half. As you can see, I'm kind of using just the tip of my knife. I do a lot of work with that. I rarely use back here. So our corn's ready. Let's get that onto our plate. Now, what are we gonna do with the remaining corn on the cob? It's called milking the cob. You take your knife, you use the dull side, sharp side, dull side, and you start up here and you just kind of press it through. And what you're collecting is everything left inside of these little cells. Looks like a honeycomb. You're just kind of getting all of that. You know, we talked about love on the Romesco sauce, all those juices. Don't leave that part of the corn behind. That's also love. Remember the same, oops. Don't go so hard like I just did. Okay, now let's get into the shallots. Give our knife a good clean here. Shallots and garlic. This is a mince. So again, we have something that's round. So when we peeled it, we cut it in half, giving it that flat base. And I've also kept the root intact. So if you can see what I've done here, I've kind of cut off the end and removed that. And then I take just a tiny bit of that tip and then I peel it, giving me this right here, but again, keeping that root intact, super important. Got the flat base, and this is where you really need to keep your fingers out of the way. So we're gonna go kind of like this, and it's small to work with. And we're just gonna do these series of horizontal cuts. And then I turn it, never going through right here because that root keeps it intact. So we cut about 75–80% through. We turn it, and then we do these little vertical slices. Not all the way through, keeping that root intact. And then you can see what's gonna happen when I turn it and kind of slice it crosswise. You get these nice little bitty dice. So we'll reserve that. Now for garlic. This is tough. You can do the exact same process. Cut, 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 but you can see there's not much room there. So I like to take that little bitty root end off, and I'll take the back of my knife and just smash it. That breaks it down, and then I can get my fingers in there, curling them nice and tight, keeping that blade only on my knuckles, and then it's all about breaking the garlic down. But by smashing it, it kind of starts to loosen it up for you, breaks it down a little bit, and this way we can get a nice mince, a nice beautiful little mince on this, so we don't have big chunks of garlic floating through this sauce or these vegetables. And as you can see, something I need to note, I keep one hand here with my fingers straight. Do not let, that's why I curl my thumb. It could sit here and I could go here with it. So I kind of curl it, and it just gives me that nice little leverage point, and I'm just rocking it back and forth, breaking down the garlic. Let's transfer that to our plate. Transfer the shallots over. All right, vegetables prepped. We got one more item to do here, and that's cilantro. Cilantro generally comes in a nice little bunch like this where it's banded for you. You definitely want to wash it. It always kind of seems to be sandy. So we want to wash this really good, and the way we want to wash this is we want to fill up a container of water. I use a little lemonade pitcher at home. I put the cilantro in like this. I agitate. The sand falls out. I pull it away. We never want to dump the water back over because you're pouring the sand right back into it. So pull the greens away. That's how you wash lettuce, herbs. You always want to remove them so that the dirt settles. And we don't need but a couple of tablespoons, so let's just take a little bit right here. And this right here is one of my favorite techniques of chopping herbs. You want to take all of the herbs and just roll them up. I see a lot of people do this with basil. Do it with all of your herbs. This way you're condensing that surface area. And as you start to slice, you start to break them down really quickly. And we have a nice little mince going on right here. You could run your knife right back over it. But I always tell my cooks and guests, the most important thing is that when we move it and there's nothing green pounded into the cutting board, if you see green that you've pounded in, two things. Your knife is super dull, which is not a good thing. Always have a sharp knife. Secondly, you've left all the flavor in the cutting board. So we want to see a nice, clean cutting board afterwards. Okay, so let's get that fish cooked, that beautiful salmon we have, and that skillet, gold bar, and corn recipe done. So what we're gonna do is I've got 2 pans on kind of a very medium-low heat. I don't have to cook on high heat. We never want our oil to smoke when we present it to the pan. So what we're gonna do first, we'll take our salmon and salt it. So when we're salting, if you try to salt it right here, you're only gonna hit one spot, but if you pull your hand up and just a nice rain of salt, you get more even distribution and you won't have these little salty spots. So we're gonna put about a tablespoon, well, maybe 2 teaspoons worth of oil. That might even be just a teaspoon. Kind of give it a swirl. I don't want excess oil. There's really no need because this king salmon is oily enough that it will start to ooze its own oils. Again, medium-low heat. We place the fillet away from us and we see it working already. We've got, you can see the oil kind of sizzling there. You can hear it. So we're using all of our senses here. And we're going to use our sight to allow us to know when it's time to flip it. And really all I'm looking for is from the bottom of the pan, it will go from this kind of orange color, this pale orange color. It'll start to cook up white. When that gets about halfway, I know that it's ready to flip over, and we're gonna have this nice crust on the bottom because we want that beautiful texture from the salmon. But the back side is kind of bare as well, so let's get some salt on that. So while we have this going, because timing is crucial here, we need to get our vegetables going at the same time. And by the time the vegetables are done, the salmon should be done. And notice I haven't touched the salmon yet. I don't want to shake my pan because I know what's going to happen. From the heat of the pan and the flesh of the salmon, in between them is a Maillard reaction. That Maillard reaction is going to produce that toasting of the protein, but it's also going to act as kind of a little non-stick resistant thing, and it's going to help release that fish from the pan. So I'm just going to be patient, knowing that I'm going to let the pan work, and again, I'm keeping it on that medium heat because you don't need a screaming hot pan. So while we're kind of keeping an eye on that, we're probably a quarter of the way up where we need to be. We'll put about a teaspoon, maybe 2, some olive oil in here. And let's start by kind of sauteing and softening. The technique is called sweating. We're going to apply heat to these vegetables, the shallots first. Add the garlic in there. A little pinch of salt. The pinch of salt it can be building flavor, but I'm using it more as an aid to start sweating these vegetables. And I'll know they're done sweating when I see these shallots start to turn translucent. Now at any time, if they're not translucent and things are starting to really get toasty and kind of look like they're burning, I have my trusty water here to kind of cool that pan down just a tiny bit to help us continue to soften. We just don't want to keep adding any extra oils or fats to it. So it looks like we're getting there. Let's go ahead and get that corn in there. Add the squash, and I'm going to turn that heat up from a medium-low to a medium. Let's really get cooking now. Slow and low, recipe for success. So again, just kind of turn it around here. And we can kind of create a steam oven here. Let's add another teaspoon or so of water. Create that steam oven. That's going to soften the corn, soften that squash, and if you get a little bit of color on the squash and the corn, that's just added flavor. So let's check out the salmon here. We're going this nice slow and low, and we're getting there. So as you can see, right underneath it, and let's talk about the tool I'm using here. It's a fish spatula. It can be used for more than fish, but what I love about it is that it bends. It gets it underneath, redistribute the fat, flip it over, and I gotta say, that's gorgeous right there. Absolutely gorgeous. We're gonna let this happen. The same thing is gonna happen. You can see we've hit about halfway. We're gonna allow this to cook up and meet it in the middle, and it's gonna be just done. I'm gonna say probably a medium doneness. But if you're unsure as to whether it's cooked inside, at the very end, you could take your knife and pierce it through and try to get it in the center. And if it goes in without any resistance, it's probably done, but then you can touch it to your wrist. If it's warm, it is ready to go. As you can see, the corn starting to soften. That squash is kind of turning a little bit more opaque. We're just going to continue with a little bit of its own steam from the liquid in the vegetables themselves. And now all we got to do is wait. But while we're waiting, why not start plating? And that rhymed. So we've got our Romesco sauce. Nice big heaping tablespoon, and then just kind of push it to the side. We'll build our corn mixture right in here. Salmon sits on top. All right, let's check out these vegetables. And they are looking near doneness. Now when we see this on the pan, that's not just extra cleaning duties right there. That's a fun. That's flavor. How do you get this to release? Add a little bit more of that liquid. Let the vegetables pick it up. If you're using metal on metal, go ahead. Give it a little scrape. Don't worry about it. And since we've got this done right here, because what I'm looking at is when we see the squash, you can see it's starting to turn translucent. It's still slightly firm, but it's also got some give. Let's add our cilantro in. Turn our burner off. Kind of toss that around together. That green really makes that yellow pop. Back to the salmon. It's completely gone of the kind of the orange, pale orange. So I'm gonna turn this off. And what I'd like to do is just take this off the heat and let it sit for a second. Because we're gonna finish this plate up. So, spoon's a chef's best friend. It's good for plating. Pile those vegetables on there. You can't go wrong with more vegetables. You're letting nature's flavors kind of take over here. Put that gorgeous piece of salmon right on top. Voila. And there you have it. King salmon, Romesco sauce, corn, gold bar squash, a little bit of cilantro, shallot, and garlic. Smells wonderful. It's gonna taste even better. If you like this recipe, this and many more are in that beautiful cookbook that we have at Cal-a-Vie, Beautiful Living. The link is in the description below. I need you to do one more thing to complete this recipe. You have to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. We'll see you next time.